Good evening, good evening. The last time I saw Dr. Sylvia Yount, she and I were standing together at the edge of a Winslow Homer painting. But we were not in a museum or a gallery, as you might imagine. We were perched on the rocky coastline of Prouts Neck, Maine. And it was a spectacular view. And we were looking at that same rock formation that so inspired Homer for years and years. I have to say, it was a double pleasure for me, seeing those rocks as if Homer was with me, and also having Sylvia with me to understand the context, the roar of the sea, and the great arc of American creativity. So for those of you who have not yet met me, I have the pleasure of serving as the director of Sam Renwick. And I've been here for all of 163 days, but who's counting? Who's counting? I also serve as the Margaret and Terry Stent director in that capacity. You're in for a special treat tonight. To see, again, through Sylvia's eyes, American art, and also how we think about presenting American art in art museums, both past and present. As you may know, this is the first in a series of 3 talks that are part of the Clarice Smith Distinguished Lectures series in American art, and I hope you've gotten this handsome brochure and that I'm going to see you 2 more times for the other speakers. I'm happy to report we have Clarice Smith in the house, artist and Sam Commissioner. Please join me in thanking her. Someone else snuck in too, that would be Betsy Bruin, my predecessor. Please join me in welcoming her home back to Sam. I have to tell you, it's an exciting time to be working at the National Museum of American Art. Why? We have a chance to tell new, exciting, different stories, to involve artists in our thinking, to change our perspectives, include new research, and ask tough questions, and sometimes even use gee-whiz technology. Let me tell you a quick story. Recently, I was summoned out of my office, and I went down the hallway, and before I knew it, I was wearing a backpack and had virtual reality goggles. And I suddenly saw our Augustine St. Gaudens grave marker in a whole new way. That, of course, is a significant piece that the writer Henry Adams had commissioned in honor of his wife Clover, who had committed suicide in 1885 creatively by drinking chemicals used to develop photographs. I don't recommend it. And this piece was designed for Rock Creek Cemetery. And suddenly the piece was no longer just in front of me in the galleries. I could see it in a different context. These are the kinds of things that we have the ability to do very soon at your local Smithsonian Art Museum. So again, seeing things differently about not only American art, but American identity. And we can question boundaries, we can question interpretation. There are a lot of things that we want to ask anew. I would argue each generation comes to American art with a fresh set of eyes. And it's our job to constantly think about how we can infect the next generation to share our passion and love. And again, also to ensure that there's a sense of wonder around American art. And again, different narrative, different artists to explore. I'm happy to tell you again, we're thinking about this constantly here at SAM, and I know Sylvia has been doing the same thing up the street at that other museum in New York that I knew so well from my days at Columbia and NYU. She started there in 2014, as you may remember, with great fanfare and delight. So tonight we're going to hear what she's thinking, what challenges and opportunities, both again about past and present ways of the context and display of American art. So let me tell you a little bit about her background, because I think you'll find it fascinating. So interestingly, her education began as an Italian major at NYU. Everybody gets to American art through different paths. Then art history, thankfully, caught her attention, and she was at the University of Pennsylvania, where she received both her master's and her PhD. She stayed in Pennsylvania and had a distinguished run at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, which is notably America's oldest school and museum. Before you knew it, she was off to the High Museum in Atlanta, Georgia, and served as the Margaret and Terry Stent Curator of American Art and the head of the American Art Department. So she and I share the generosity of the Stents. Before you knew it, she was lured away to Virginia. At the Virginia Museum of Art, she served there as their chief curator and held the title of Louise B. and J. Harwood Corcoran Curator of American Art. For those of you who have followed her, as I have, she's done major exhibitions and catalogs on such artists as Cecilia Beaux, who I always think is a better portraitist than Mary Cassatt, and also did important projects and research on Maxwell Parrish, as well as Jacob Lawrence and countless other American modernists. And each of these museum stops, she had a chance to look anew. What was the display of the collections? What were the specific opportunities? And so now she's gonna share a little bit of that thinking tonight. As you know, she's back in New York and serves as the Lawrence A. Fleischman Curator in charge of the American wing at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. There, she carries not only curatorial oversight, but some administrative work as she thinks about those great collections that span fine and decorative arts from the colonial period to the earliest 20th century. So now again, Sylvia Yount and I share a wonderful view, not of the rocky shores of Maine, but of you, our curious and attentive audience. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Sylvia Yount to our stage.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, for that very gracious introduction. It is a great pleasure to be with you this evening. I'm particularly honored to be participating in this esteemed series with its many distinguished alumni and alumnae, including following my own respected colleague, Notting Frelinghuysen, who spoke with you last year about the Tiffany & Company designer, Agnes Northrup. I hope many of you were here for that lecture as well. I'm also privileged to have met Clarice Smith on numerous occasions while I served on the staff of the Virginia Museum, and I want to thank her for making this program possible. It's really an extraordinary gathering every year, and we look forward to the different speakers. Given my long relationship with the Smithsonian American Art Museum, probably the first self-contained collection of the art of the United States that I really frequented quite regularly in my pre-graduate school years, and one that inspired my interest, I think, in concentrating on American art and museum work. And credits to all the curators here and to Betsy Brune for all that great work they've done here over the years. I also want to recognize SAM's ongoing preeminence as a center for our increasingly pluralistic field, and I think you see that. It's always interesting to see the list of fellows that are announced every year and just the variety of the programs and the projects they're pursuing. So from revered colleagues and collections to landmark exhibitions and scholarly endeavors, such as the Consequential Fellowships Program and the Journal, SAM remains a pioneering model for what a museum of a broadly defined American art can be in the 21st century. And tonight, I'd like to explore with you all the multi-layered significance of that model for museum professionals and visitors alike, one that is being more widely debated and embraced during these challenging times of fractured identities and cultural values that are calling into question our understanding of what constitutes America, and by extension, American art. In the current post-Charlottesville heated debates over contested histories and meanings of public monuments, particularly memorials to Confederate generals erected long after Appomattox and the failure of Reconstruction during the Jim Crow era as potent expressions of lost cause ideology and systemic American racism, museums have been frequently mentioned as the appropriate repositories for these works. At left is the Lee Monument on Richmond's Monument Avenue, and at right, the infamous statue that sparked the unrest in Charlottesville just over a month ago. Now, whether you're an advocate for removal, relocation, or contextual reinterpretation, the fate of these large sculptures intended for outdoor public display does not, in my view, lie with art museums. It's fair to say that American museums already have their share of appropriately scaled problematic works shaped by this country's original sins of genocide and enslavement, as well as related struggles regarding oppression and resistance, discord and protest, some even by famous artists. Among the things that strikes me about this frequent call to move these troubling monuments indoors, an enormous logistical as well as political challenge, as you might imagine, is what it reveals about current public perception. Yes, museums are on one level inherently conservative institutions due to their focus on long-term preservation and interpretation of the cultural past and present. But at the same time, 21st century museums, be it of art, history, science, are so much more than that, having strategically expanded their missions to welcome, entertain, and educate broader audiences, in the process creating a new kind of public square. And I think you really feel that in the Kogod square that we have here in the museum, in the wonderful atrium. It will come as little surprise to this audience that a wide range of people have tremendous interest in what we have and what we do, and have found a sense of shared belonging in our midst, even while periodically questioning who gets to speak for disquieting works and to decide what museums should and should not exhibit. And I'm thinking specifically of the controversy over the contemporary painter Dana Schutz's Emmett Till canvas in the last Whitney Biennial. While certain New York museums have foregrounded positions of activism in terms of cultural relevance, recent exhibitions at the Whitney, MoMA, and Brooklyn come to mind, showing you some images here. Even those that are challenged by, let's call it, responsive nimbleness, have a role to play in that process. In his piece weighing in on the public monument debate, New York Times art critic Holland Cotter echoed the call for moving the most offensive examples to museums, arguing, for this to happen, though, museums will have to relinquish their pretense of ideological neutrality. They will have to become truth-telling institutions. Cotter continued, our encyclopedic museums, like the Met, are giant warehouses filled with global objects designed to function exactly the way Confederate images do, as instruments of ideological persuasion with ethical messages we might well find repellent if we could read their visual symbols. And we need to learn to be symbol readers with our eyes wide open in our own political moment. Cotter concluded, museums can be training grounds for that reading, though to be truly useful schools, they must be willing to identify themselves as historical halls of shame as well as halls of fame. Now, this argument is one that Cotter, in my opinion, one of the most thoughtful and open-minded critics working today, one that he's posited before, and I'm thinking of his much-discussed Making Museums Moral Again, published in the Times in March 2016. In that piece, he highlighted the Met's departments of ancient art, Egyptian and classical, calling out curators for not rethinking their permanent collection gallery narratives with the goal of exploratory truth-telling, while justly praising the museum's Congo Power and Majesty temporary exhibition for not shying away from uncomfortable histories of colonial exploitation and enslavement in polemical wall texts. Had Cotter expanded his framework at the Met and beyond, he would have found ample evidence in multiple American art collections and museums of how curators are probing, in his words, art as evidence of history, and pursuing a reckoning with the past through art that has become more urgent in what some have termed our nearly apocalyptic moment. Many history museums have long embraced this activist social justice role through their stated missions. For example, your newest neighbor, the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture, released a powerful statement in the aftermath of Charlottesville, affirming their commitment, quote, to bringing history with all of its pain and its promise front and center, Continuing, it's only when we illuminate the dark corners and tell the unvarnished truth can we learn history's lessons and bridge the gaps that divide us. When it comes to art museums, though, certain commentators and supporters feel that such agendas do not fit as comfortably in the realm of artistic expression. Famously, the New York Times' Roberta Smith, writing in 2000, expressed concern that what she called the mysterious creative work of curators was at that time in danger of being reduced, quote, to the level of the art historian or the social historian, a curious statement to be sure. She continued to argue this position in 2013 when she advocated for breaking down walls between academic and so-called folk artists in American museums, an argument grounded in both aesthetic and sociopolitical terms, not to mention value judgments. Stating that the 2012 reinstallation of the Met's American Wing opted to, quote, tell American history through gallery displays rather than showing its best paintings to their best advantage, Smith revealed her bias against more contextual approaches to curating. And suffice it to say, our senior curator of paintings, Betsy Kornhauser, has been hanging this Thomas Chambers, the painting at right, with our iconic Thomas Cole's oxbow for some time now. Past controversies over so-called art historical revisionism, such as those that engulfed SAM during its 1991 West as America exhibition, are relevant in this context. And so is the Met's much reviled 1969 Harlem on My Mind in terms of the issue of inclusive artistic agency. And the long-term reverberations of both efforts continue to be debated. There's no question these cultural battles still haunt and inform curatorial practice as institutions are increasingly called on to choose a path of broad or focused, inclusive or exclusive approaches that not even the most hidebound museums can now ignore. I was reminded of the complicated self-positioning of museums during turbulent times by a compelling photograph, this one, featured in one of the many Smithsonian Magazine emails that seem to regularly flood my inbox. It shows a group of citizens sharing a corner on F Street, mostly black women, standing close to 5 heavily armed white male National Guards. They are in front of the shuttered Hex department store, not too far from the newly renovated Patent Office cum Museum building where we gather today. The photograph was taken in 1968, just days after the uprising that followed the assassination of the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. As explored in the current exhibition marking the 50th anniversary of the opening of the National Collection of Fine Arts, precursor to SAM, and the debut of the new National Portrait Gallery in a single building, this important event, coming in the midst of the chaos and pain of 1968, was presented as a hopeful symbol of healing and community rebuilding for this city as well as the nation. And there is a wonderful exhibition upstairs on the second level, if you haven't seen, about the 50th anniversary. Some then and now would question whether art museums should be more than sanctuaries for quiet meditation and reflection. But it's important to recall that the first encyclopedic art museums in this country were established with broader agendas of cultural reform rather than goals of aesthetic contemplation and connoisseurship. The Met, incorporated in 1870 and opening its first home on 14th Street in 1872, followed by Boston and Philadelphia a few years later, they were all outgrowths of the phenomenon of World's Fairs and modeled after London's South Kensington Museum, now the V&A, and its example of collecting international artworks in plaster casts of famous sculptures as tools of practical education and design. The MFA's early motto was actually art, education, and industry. The Met's founding mission emphasized the relationship between a museum and the library for art for, quote, encouraging and developing the study of the fine arts and the application of arts to manufacture and practical life, of advancing the general knowledge of kindred spirits, kindred subjects, well, that was a slip, for Americanists among us, and to that end, of furnishing popular instruction. Though these early institutional holdings were soon supplanted by more traditional fine arts, largely donated by wealthy collectors who prioritized the concept of the masterpiece, what can be interpreted in the original mission statement as something akin to a public library of visual culture is echoed today by the Met's president and CEO, Daniel Weiss, who calls the museum a, quote, cultural university that produces knowledge through exhibitions, conservation work, research, and scholarship, and represents a commitment to human achievement and cultural empathy. Given my current perch in New York, I'd like us now to examine the Met, specifically the American Wing, as a case study of sorts of how museums are increasingly questioning their curatorial privilege and practice, breaking boundaries in expansive, consequential ways, in an effort to be more responsive, relevant, and accessible cultural caretakers in our pluralistic society. While the Met is by no means alone in this effort, the weight of its history, its scale, and its resources inevitably invite greater public scrutiny and expectation. The Met has always been sensitive to the importance of founding legacies that have shaped the institution over its 147-year history. And I'm showing you our first building in Central Park, the 1880 Ruskinian Gothic Divine by Calvert Vaux and Jacob Ray Mould, that Edith Wharton referred to in her New York novel, The Age of Innocence, as mouldered in unvisited loneliness. Love that expression. Founding Met trustee and architect Richard Morris Hunt's 1902 Beaux-Arts building, with its grand entrance on Fifth Avenue, ushered in a new era of critical reputation and visitor popularity that continues to define the Met today, 7 million visitors and counting. Indeed, the Met today is not your parents' or grandparents' museum, having become more experimental, interdisciplinary, and cross-cultural in its focus. Though still invested in producing grand historical narratives as well as spectacle, one critic has called us a history writing and editing machine, but the museum is less a dusty repository for works of art of the past now than a place of so-called living culture, where aesthetic experiences can be found not only in our extensive galleries, but in our performance spaces and on our website. For example, the American Wing was lucky to participate in our Met Live Arts program's annual Artist in Residence in 2015, working with the Civilians, an investigative theatrical troupe, a New York troupe, that produced a special program on the American collections exploring issues of art, identity and cultural nationalism through interviews with staff and visitors that were later dramatized verbatim, this is their technique, in a performance that also featured original music, including a rather amazing rap about one of our icons, John Singer Sargent's Madam X. And I was going to play it for you, but I thought I wouldn't take the time to do that right now. It's on our website, though, if you want to hear it. This past year's artist in residence, Nate DeMeo, known for his popular podcast, The Memory Palace, also introduced a fresh perspective on the Wing's collections by crafting 8 evocative stories inspired by a range of objects. These oral experiences, which expand the amount of information and interpretation curators can provide well past a 100-word label, are available to visitors in our galleries via highlighted signage, as well as on our website. From a meditation on an early 19th century glass bottle to John Vanderlin's ill-fated Versailles panorama and beyond, all of these poignant personal narratives by Nate express the knowledge that, in his words, a work of art can contain so much more than what is there before you. The issues and themes explored in these commission programs, shifting definitions of American art and culture, diversity and representation, enriched narrative content, these all resonate with the Wing's departmental strategic plan, which aligns with the Met's institutional one, adopted roughly 2 years ago. Initiated by our former director, Tom Campbell, the museum's 5-year strategy, the first in our history, the first formal 5-year plan in the history of the Met, should make that point, prioritizes the visitor experience and public access to a greater degree than ever before, while not diluting the importance of the Met's collections and programming that reflect the fundamental shared belief in the power of art and ideas to engage broader audiences. As Stephanie mentioned, I've had the privilege of heading the wing now for almost exactly 3 years, coming to the Met from a senior leadership position at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts in Richmond, and before that, the High Museum of Art in Atlanta, and the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts in Philadelphia before that. As a specialist in late 19th and early 20th century American art and culture, I've long focused on lesser-known women artists and artists of color in an effort to redress or reconsider the so-called art historical canon by developing American collections and exhibitions that feature a wider range of artists and works, both transformative and textural. And throughout my academic and curatorial career, the American Wings collection has been an important touchstone. It was a genuine honor to succeed, love this photo, the esteemed scholar of colonial furniture, Morrison Heckscher, at such a critical juncture in the Met's history. Morey and his crew, including senior management and trustees, are pictured in this playful image, marking the conservation and reframing of the iconic Emanuel Leutze painting of Washington crossing the Delaware, as well as the 2012 completion of the American Wings' highly successful renovation and reinstallation. That ambitious effort emphasized to a greater degree an intellectual framework of American history through a series of new paintings and sculpture galleries, folk art, the Civil War, and the West, for example, as well as decorative art installations organized by media and the interactive interpretive screens for the storied period rooms. Fast forward 5 years, and the department's curatorial staff now consists of 5 specialists in decorative arts and 5, myself included, in painting, sculpture, and works on paper, as well as a number of talented research associates and assistants, a staffing that represents a return to a balanced complement of expertise. Today, our collection comprises colonial to early 20th century American and Latin American painting, sculpture, drawings, and decorative arts, including furniture, textiles, ceramics, glass, silver, metalwork, jewelry, as well as historic interiors and architectural fragments, produced by both highly trained and so-called folk or self-taught artists. A large number of these roughly 20,000 works are on regular view throughout our 75 galleries, while more than 7,000 of those are displayed in our Luce Center for the Study of American Art, an open storage space the Met inaugurated in 1988, a few years before yours, and one that the contemporary Brazilian, New York-based artist Vic Muniz has called a semantic maze, transgressive and empowering, because there is no there's no curator leading you through that space. Much of the work in the American Wings collection is iconic in nature, with numerous textbook examples of painting, sculpture, and decorative arts. Yet since arriving at the Met, I've been keen to interrogate our claim of having the most comprehensive collection of American art in the world, something that's often touted, as one generation's canon, of course, is another's biased survey. Encouraging staff and museum visitors to re-examine the object lessons behind the fine and decorative art collections in the American Wing is a challenge and a privilege I take very seriously in my role as the head of this historic department. And over the past 3 years, we've embarked on that process in a variety of ways, through more intentional collection building that addresses notable gaps in our holdings, through cross-departmental collaborative installations and public programs, as well as through ongoing engagement with other museum and academy-based colleagues. And here, this is Jill Lepore speaking last year at a little think tank we put together. For example, this so-called think tank we put together on reconsidering the American Wing that we had last December, co-sponsored with the Chipstone and the Wunsch Americana Foundation, brought together a range of art historians, and artists, along with American Wing staff and stakeholders, to think critically about the resonances and complexities between past and present, exclusion and inclusion, found in our collections. This gathering was followed last spring by 2 collaborative seminars on American art at the Met, conducted with the Bard Graduate Center and with the Graduate Center of the City of New York. The lessons we learned from these productive collaborations affirmed our commitment to tell expanded stories of American art, life, and identity both through our strong, mature holdings, as well as new acquisitions that help us bridge the lacunae, the wings collections, in our collections, with works of similar quality and significance. One Bard student termed our measured approach to enriching our canonic collection and disrupting gallery narratives as subtle subversion. And it is true that we've been both thoughtful and deliberate as befitting the scope and effort of the task at an institution like the Met. First, we're more actively addressing absences in our collection by adding strong work by underrepresented artists of color. For example, this important portrait by Joshua Johnson, America's first professional Black artist to earn his living from his talents, as well as this pair of Hiawatha and Minnehaha marble busts by the mixed-race, half African-American, half Native American Chippewa, Ojibwa, sculptor Edmonia Lewis. And I'm also showing you a French landscape by William Harper, a Chicagoan who studied with Henry Ossawa Tanner in Paris. Soon after I arrived at the Met, I worked with our curator of silver, Beth Weiss, and our curator of textiles, Amelia Peck, on a complimentary display of Boston silver, which, as many of you may know, was far more valued than paintings in 18th century British American society, and an extremely rare portrait by the first documented enslaved painter working in the colonies, Prince Dama, owned by the Henry Barnes family. Amelia had acquired the portrait of William Duguid, a Scottish-born, Boston-based merchant, a few years earlier due to her interest in the sitter's chintz dressing gown, and included it in her groundbreaking 2013 Interwoven Globe exhibition, which explored the international market for 18th century textiles. But the portrait had yet to be displayed in the American wing. After it went on view in our Colonial Painting Gallery, she Amelia co-authored an article for the January 2015 issue of the magazine Antiques on this fascinating and all but unknown artist with a Massachusetts-based historian who was researching Prince Dama's work and first alerted Amelia to his identity. To date, 3 portraits by him have been identified, and those other 2 are in the Historical Society of the Hingham, Mass, where this woman works. And these are the only known paintings to survive by an enslaved artist working in colonial America. So as you can imagine, it adds a very different dimension to this gallery of colonial British American portraits when you walk into the wing. More recently, Adrian Spinozzi, our assistant research curator of American decorative arts with an expertise in 19th and 20th century ceramics, as well as a growing interest in Southern stoneware, acquired at auction this striking face vessel associated with the increasingly famous potting communities around Edgefield, South Carolina. Attributed to an enslaved African American, the harvest jug, with its handsome mottled green alkaline glaze, is one of only a handful of known face vessels by this particular unidentified maker. In these terms, it represents a critical addition to the Met's collection, which is weak in Southern material, really across the board. Although exceedingly rare, the face jug is well known through J.A. Palmer's The Aesthetic Darky, a disturbing and compelling stereopticon photograph from 1882 of an African-American youth seated at a table admiring a similar harvest jug, one likely made by the same hand as the Met's. This satirical image, inspired by a famous period cartoon of Oscar Wilde, depicted as a monkey admiring a lily and a sunflower, which was on the cover of Harper's Weekly in the 1880s. It is the earliest visual documentation of an American face vessel. The photograph also resonates with the Met's deep aesthetic movement holdings, adding a new dimension of race, regionalism, and class to the late 19th century cultural phenomenon's more traditional interpretive context. Moving beyond the exceptionalist question of what is American about American art, famously posed by a one-time professor of mine, John McCubry, and which defined the academic field from roughly the 1960s to the 1980s, even longer in many museums, we in the wing, like many other curatorial and academic colleagues exploring issues of cultural encounters and exchange, are now also asking where and when is American art? For instance, we're embracing a more hemispheric definition of American by introducing a gallery of colonial Mexican art, organized by Rhonda Castle, the wing's first ever curator of Latin American art, who's developing this new collection area for the Met. And last fall, we dipped our toes into featuring Native American art in conversation with more mainstream American art via 3 strategic loans from the Charles and Valerie Diker collection, which then became gifts at the end of the year, and richly resonate with American paintings and sculptures. Namely, Jules Tavernier's dramatic scene of a Pomo Indian roundhouse ceremony, which I'm showing you here. This is the wing's first major work by a California-based artist, and it was acquired just last year. And it's featured in our galleries right now alongside a striking example of the Pomo's celebrated artistry in basket making. And a more recent promised gift, Gilbert Stuart's ravishing portrait of the most famous Native American leader of his generation, the Mohawk statesman Tyendinaga, known to the English as Joseph Brant. I noticed the National Portrait Gallery just acquired a beautiful print after the Romney portrait of Tyendinaga. This was complemented by a very rare early 19th century pouch, likely of Seneca origin. Both nations were part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Then in our Art of the America gallery, our Western gallery, organized really by Thayer Tolles, we installed a sizable early 20th century olla or jar by Maria and Julian Martinez, the husband and wife creative team of Tuwa Indians of the San Ildefonso Pueblo. This addition to the popular gallery of Western art has allowed us to really expand and enrich the story of Native and regional artistic production and reception beyond such well-known figures as Frederick Remington and members of the Taos School. More recently, we added to this Western gallery this rather remarkable pictorial muslin, terrible photo from my phone, sorry, from the mid-1920s of the Battle of Little Bighorn by Standing Bear, a respected Lakota artist and leader of the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. All of these experimental dialogues between Native American and more traditionally defined American art, though far from perfectly realized, point the way to the major installation of the promise gift of 91 objects from the Diker collection, in addition to more than 20 other gifts and loans from these pioneering collectors that will be featured in the wing's special exhibition galleries in our ground floor space in October 2018. This will be the 4th time that selections of the Dikers' holdings will be exhibited at the Met, beginning in the 1990s and most recently seen in late 2016. In these prior instances, the Diker collection appeared in the Rockefeller Galleries, the Michael Rockefeller Galleries, or AAOA, the Arts of Africa, Oceania, and the Americas, the department where Native American art has always been displayed at the Met as tribal art. The forthcoming 2018 installation marks the move of the collection to the American Wing, a landmark event on many levels. As the Met has never had a full-time curator of Native American art on staff, something we are committed to rectifying in the very near future, the objects for the Wing's display have been selected by guest curator Gaylord Torrance, the Fred and Virginia Merrill Senior Curator of American Indian Art at the Nelson Atkins Museum in Kansas City, and Gaylord has worked closely with the Dikers over the years and has a very good collaborative relationship with them. These featured objects include painting, sculpture, drawing, costume, ceramics, and baskets by both identified and unrecorded makers, representing the extensive artistic achievements of culturally distinct indigenous peoples throughout North America and across time, from the 2nd millennium to the early 20th century. The works reveal a broad range of artistic practice from various regions of the United States and Canada: the woodlands, Western Plains and Plateau, California and Great Basin, Southwest, Northwest Coast, and the Arctic. Represented nations include Acoma, Apache, Cheyenne, Creek, Crow, Hopi-Touwa, Kiowa, Lakota, Pomo, Seneca, Seminole, Tlingit, and Zuni, among others. Some of the greatest strengths in the Diker collection are sculpture from British Columbia coast and southwestern Alaska, California baskets, pottery from the southwestern Pueblos, Plains Nation drawings, clothing and personal accessories such as pouches, bags, and containers, and even rarer similar material of the eastern woodlands nations. In sum, the Diker collection is a transformative promise gift for the Met, filling gaps in our current and small Native American holdings and enriching the stories we are able to share regarding a more broadly defined American art. The 2018 exhibition will reveal the comprehensiveness and high aesthetic quality of the Diker collection and underline its appropriateness in a Department of Historical American Art. This first ever inclusion of Native American art in the Met's American Wing, primarily devoted to the more traditional Euro-American art, can be seen as a turning point for the presentation and interpretation of the wider cultural production of North America in an art museum. By emphasizing relevant confluences between native and non-native objects, this approach resonates with so-called middle ground studies of cross-cultural exchange and intersectionality, increasingly prominent in the academy, if less typical in art museums. We're well aware of the myriad debates, and deeply held positions surrounding the collecting and display of Native American art by encyclopedic art museums, and are committed to thoughtfully and sensitively exploring the entangled histories of contact and colonization from both indigenous and Euro-American perspectives, with the assistance of Native and non-Native colleagues and specialists. Future responsive displays of a variety of artwork, historical and contemporary, Native and non, replacing light-sensitive Diker objects that require rotation, will further these timely dialogues. Now, while the American Wing is clearly looking ahead and embracing a more encompassing definition of American art, we remain very sensitive to the ongoing value of our historical foundations. From our 1924 founding, in the midst of a popular colonial revival zeitgeist sweeping the country that valued both ancestor worship and the Americanization of newly arrived immigrants, the Wing, freestanding with a separate Central Park entrance, established itself as the first permanent installation in an art museum of British American colonial and early federal decorative arts and architecture, complete with theatrical interpreters, well before colonial Williamsburg, I should add. The imposing Greek Revival facade, akin to yours, but of Martin Thompson's Branch Bank of the United States, torn down at 15.5 Wall Street in 1915, was one of the first artifacts to be pursued for the Wing. It was secured by Robert DeForest, whose dual positions as president of the Met from 1913 to 1931 and president of New York City's Art Commission, ensured that the facade was saved and eventually formed the entrance to the American Wing, which he and his wife, Emily DeForest, founded some 93 years ago. Today, when visitors step across that threshold of the facade, symbolizing American classicism and capitalism, they're entering the Wing's original three-story core building. There's no question that this inaugural focus on historical domestic interiors and Americana, primarily of the Northeast, shaped the department's collection development over time, and our acclaimed decorative arts holdings still define the Wing's profile for many patrons and visitors today. And I'm showing you one of our current installations organized by Elise England, titled Revolutionary Philadelphia, featuring some new additions and loans to the collection. Having said that, I feel it's important to emphasize that the founders of the American Wing, Robert and Emily DeForest, were also deeply committed to a more broadly defined American art, avidly collecting Mexican arts and crafts, as well as Pennsylvania German Fractor, Native American baskets from California, and unique works by their distant relative, Louis Comfort Tiffany, in addition to early American historical interiors and furniture. Their approach, if not fully hemispheric, was certainly well ahead of its time, long before most American museums began to focus on developing Latin American holdings in concert with more traditional American art. In fact, Robert DeForest envisioned a permanent gallery of Mexican art at the Met, and Emily DeForest, in 1911, offered to donate to the museum part of her collection of Mexican ceramics, specifically Talavera de Puebla, with that purpose in mind. Here is an example of one of the most important pieces of her pottery collection, as well as an excerpt from a letter she wrote to the Met's director about her proposed gift. And I'm going to let you read it yourself so I can get a sip of water. Whereas the DeForest's persistent advocacy at the Met led to a landmark traveling exhibition of Mexican arts in 1930, curated by René Darnacourt, organized and circulated by the American Federation of Arts, and funded by the Carnegie Corporation, their dream of interweaving Mexican arts and artifacts into a narrative of more mainstream American art remained elusive at their home institution, due primarily to a lack of interest on the part of future administrators and curators. Then, in 2013, Tom Campbell appointed Rhonda Castle, as I mentioned, a Hispanist art historian that was then serving as a postdoctoral fellow in the European Paintings Department on leave from her position at the Indianapolis Museum as chief curator. And Rhonda at that time became the museum's first curator of colonial Latin American art, and Tom positioned her in the American wing. In Rhonda's inaugural installation on collecting the arts of colonial Mexico, which opened on our second floor roughly 2 years ago, soon after I arrived, and has continued to evolve, she tells the fascinating story of the DeForest's pioneering intentions for the wing in a single gallery, similar to Sam's wonderful gallery on New Spain and Atlantic world traditions and influences. Despite the efforts of the DeForest to expand the American wing's collections beyond the United States, from 1924 until its closure in 1974 for its first major renovation, early British American decorative arts of the Northeast continued to dominate the galleries, with a much smaller feature of paintings and sculptures squeezed into that framework. The decorative and fine arts were actually divided into two separate departments at that time. Missing the opportunity to coordinate the reopening of the much expanded wing with America's bicentennial year due to New York's fiscal crisis in 1975, sounds familiar, it would be another 5 years before the project was completed. And in 1980, the new galleries and courtyard were enclosed in a dramatic skylit design by Kevin Roche, John Dinkeloo, and Associates, one that continues to be among the most popular public spaces at the Met. This transformative development broadened the American wing's character and scope, and the latest multi-year renovation and reinstallation, completed in 2012, provided even greater flexibility for telling varied stories with a variety of objects. The American wing is among one of the largest of the Met's 17 curatorial departments and the only Western collecting area at our institution to regularly blend so-called fine and decorative arts. Under Maury Hector's leadership, the 2012 renovation unified the formerly separate departments of American Decorative Arts and American Painting and Sculpture with the reclaimed historical name of the American Wing. American painting, sculpture, and drawings that are today among the most celebrated and beloved works at the Met were collected sparingly from the time of the museum's founding in 1870, but not brought together comprehensively in the American wing for nearly another century. And if American history, particularly of the Northeast, was at the center of the wing's decorative arts collecting, then it was the contemporary artist-patron relationship that shaped the acquisition of the fine arts. For example, Hiram Power's California was donated to the Met in 1872 by the early museum supporter William Backhouse Astor, making it the first American sculpture, indeed the first work by an American artist, to enter the collection. Our Hudson River School paintings were also an early collecting strength due to those artists' presence on the museum's board. John Kensett, for example, as well as Frederick Church's epic Heart of the Andes, pictured here. It eventually came to the Met as a gift due to the artist's relationship with William Blodgett. Both were early trustees at the Met. And the museum's inaugural core of the American Drawings collection derived from the Reverend Elias Lyman Magoon's passion for the Ruskinian work of William Trost Richards, and he made a gift of 85 watercolors by Richards in 1880 to the museum. The American Wing's 1980 renovation, which led to an expanded series of galleries of decorative and fine arts, evoked the precedent set with the 1909 Hudson Fulton exhibition, the Met's first foray into showcasing chronologically installed American art in its then special exhibition galleries. This landmark lone show was part of New York's commemoration of the 300th anniversary of Henry Hudson's exploration of the river that bears his name. Robert DeForest, who served as chair of the celebration's art committee, later noted that the Hudson Fulton exhibition was not only intended to mark an important historical event, but to, quote, test out the question whether American domestic art was worthy of a place in an art museum. The popularity of the exhibition, seen by nearly 300,000 visitors in just over 3 months, proved that this material was indeed worthy, and the Met soon committed itself to building a collection of colonial and federal decorative arts. While traditional philosophies and approaches to the American past, as well as ideas of Americanness and cultural nationalism, determined the character of the wing from its 1924 founding through the World War II years, it was soon moving forward. Writing on the occasion of the wing's 25th anniversary in 1949, the magazine Antiques described the wing as, quote, a pioneering effort that led the way in furthering knowledge and appreciation of our American heritage. It is no exaggeration to say that its influence has been felt directly or indirectly by all the museums and historical societies working in the American field, all the restorations, public and private, all the publications on antiques, and all the collectors of American things. The editorial went on to call for an expanded educational mission and a focus on the 19th and 20th centuries, imagine, as the wing looked to its future, given the, quote, profound, enthusiastic, and inquiring interest that exists all over the country in the symbols of our own background. There's no question that we met and continue to embrace that early challenge, establishing and expanding our celebrated holdings of 19th century decorative and fine arts, especially works of the aesthetic movement. This is our latest historical interior, the aesthetic Worsham Rockefeller dressing room, designed by George Shasty, the little-remembered German immigrant who made his successful career in late 19th century Gilded Age New York. And when we debuted this room, Nani Frelinghuysen did a wonderful exhibition about George Shasty and looking at him as kind of the forgotten competitor to the Herder brothers. We're also addressing the issue of chronological boundaries between historical, modern, and contemporary works in a variety of ways. Famously, the Met's controversial director, Thomas Hoving, proposed the subjective collection taxonomy in 1967, the year the Contemporary Arts Department was established, with Henry Getzhaler as their first curator, with this formula. That is work made by artists born by 1876, America's centennial year, reside in the American wing, after 1876 in the modern contemporary galleries. And the fact that our galleries are now separated by 5 long city blocks at different ends of the Met's Fifth Avenue building has made this, some 50 years later, not an ideal division for a number of reasons. Yet, despite this problematic inheritance, we are finding ways to explore dialogues between artists living and dead. For example, we currently have on view in the wing Sarah Berman's Closet, an innovative collaboration between our curator of period rooms and textiles, Amelia Peck, and the mother-son artists Myra and Alex Kalman. This partnership represents the first time that the wing's historical interiors or period rooms have been interpreted through a contemporary lens. By putting the late 19th century Worsham Rockefeller dressing room, basically a glorified closet, in conversation with the late 20th century, far less elaborate but deeply meaningful interior of Sarah Berman, mother and grandmother to Myra and Alex Kalman, we can explore issues of women's history and identity, taste and self-fashioning, not to mention immigration and mobility. The result has captivated many visitors, and we're very pleased to be able to extend this display through the end of November. So if you have not seen it yet, I encourage you to come and experience Sarah's wonderful closet. This historical modern focus can further be achieved through cross-departmental loans and collaborations at the Met. We're very privileged, of course, to have 16 other departments to work with, curatorial departments, as seen in our recently closed Shaker at the Met installation, featuring the Charles Sheeler painting Americana from the Met's Modern and Contemporary Department, as well as a photograph and a video projection of Martha Graham's Appalachian Spring Ballet, works that reveal the 20th century fascination with Shaker culture and design. And I can't tell you how much I miss hearing the strains of Copeland every morning when I come into the wing. I really miss that video. Similarly, in our Civil War and Reconstruction gallery, we're devising displays that re-examine this rather idiosyncratic chronological divide. For example, I'm showing you a wall that features two very different representations of the radical abolitionist John Brown, John Stuart Curry's firebrand Vasawadamy, a larger-than-life 1939 sketch for the artist's mural cycle in the rotunda of the Kansas State Capitol in Topeka, alongside Thomas Hovenden's more subdued martyr on the way to his death in Harper's Ferry, Virginia, now West Virginia, a work painted in the early 1880s. This display has proven to be one of the most popular and unexpected juxtapositions of 19th and 20th century works for our visitors. And soon, we'll be adding a remarkable object to that gallery that will add yet another dimension to this historical storyline, a large inscribed jar by the enslaved potter and poet David Drake of Edgefield, South Carolina, whose work is now celebrated and widely sought after by many museums. And we plan to follow this permanent collection display with a loan exhibition curated by Adrian Spinozzi, who brought in the face jug just a few months ago, that will include many works by Drake as well as other examples of Edgefield ware. The Civil War and Reconstruction Gallery has more representations of African American subjects by noted artists such as John Quincy Adams Ward, Winslow Homer, and Thomas Anschutz than any other space in the wing, but until recently, what was missing was a work by an African American artist. Now we have this appealing circa 1890 oil by Charles Ethan Porter, the only 19th century Black artist in America to specialize in still lifes and one of the first to exhibit his art nationally. Porter studied in New York and Paris and painted this work at a time when the watermelon, an earlier symbol of American abundance, and during the Civil War period, one particularly associated with free blacks, was being recast in popular terms as a symbol of virulent stereotyping. By reclaiming this American subject in artistic terms with a French stylistic flavor, Porter challenged a insidious racist trope. After decades of success painting still lifes of fruit and flowers with the support of patrons such as Samuel Clemens and Frederick Edwin Church, Porter died in poverty and obscurity. A resurgence of interest in his work dates to the late 1980s, and I should mention that we were also able to acquire a distinctive watercolor by Porter that is currently featured in our exhibition, Gilded Age Drawings at the Met, in our Wolf Galleries. As some of you may know, our Civil War stories are not limited to one gallery, but spill into different areas, namely our grand two-story Landscape, History, and National Identity gallery, featuring a recreated display of epic paintings from the Metropolitan Sanitary Fair of 1864, an effort largely organized by women to raise funds for the Union troops. The key work in this story is Emanuel Leutze's Washington Crossing the Delaware, a centerpiece of the second-floor galleries in the American wing since 2012, and long an icon of the Met's paintings collection. The bombastic great man narrative continues to draw international visitors to see in person this endlessly reproduced work, making it a so-called destination picture. Indeed, the gallery was designed specifically to showcase the painting in its newly recreated frame, in all its panoramic glory for viewing up close, as well as at a distance, by a large number of visitors. If they elect to read the label for this canonical painting, they'll learn that the 1851 composition is far more complex than it first appears, with the German-born and trained artist more directly inspired by recent European revolutions, specifically in Saxony, than America's 18th century past. Leutze had explored the subject of revolutionary change in other canvases, but his celebrated homage to Washington and the exemplary spirit that inspired British American colonists to fight for independence marked the first time the revered general had been portrayed in a boat and on such a grand scale. And it proved to be exactly the right subject at the right time for a savvy immigrant artist looking to establish himself in America. How many of you know that the painting almost ended up in Washington? Any hands? Yes, apparently a group of US congressmen attempted to purchase it for the White House when it was exhibited in the rotunda of the Capitol in 1852. However, Leutze had already sold it to a New York collector for a high price, and it later passed to another one before ending up at the Met. The painting had a complicated history after entering the Met's collection by donation in 1897. A great favorite of the general public, especially families and school groups, many viewers, including museum officials, could not take it seriously as either a work of so-called fine art or a historically accurate account of Washington's 1776 campaign to mount a surprise Christmas Eve attack on an encampment of Hessian troops in Trenton, New Jersey. In 1929, the gift of a large collection of American and European paintings necessitated a rehanging of the Met's picture galleries, and at that time, curator of paintings, Bryson Burroughs, also a painter with a modernist sensibility, recommended deinstalling the Leutze and putting it on semi-permanent loan to the New York City School Board, an indication of its then lowly status as almost a popular didactic illustration for children. Ultimately, in 1932, the Met's president, William Sloane Coffin, mandated that the 12 by 21-foot canvas be installed at the entrance to the American wing, which had opened just 8 years earlier, and specifically put it there to commemorate the bicentennial of Washington's birth. Over subsequent decades, the painting migrated between various galleries at the Met, as well as being lent to exhibitions in Texas and Pennsylvania. It returned to the museum under Thomas Hoving's populist directorship in 1970 and was moved into the newly designed American wing in 1980. But it did not find its true place of honor until the most recent renovation of the wing in 2012. Some of you may know that Leutze's is not the only painting of Washington crossing the Delaware owned by the Met. We're also lucky to have this version by the acclaimed modernist Jacob Lawrence, who produced an indelible body of art over his more than 60-year career, exploring the Black experience as a key expression of American culture. Lawrence began his career producing distinctive narrative series of historical figures who peopled his upbringing and education in Harlem. While it was Lawrence's ambitious The Migration of the Negro epic of 1940 that launched his long and successful career, the artist honed his visual storytelling skills with the historical subjects of Toussaint Louverture in 1937, Harriet Tubman in 1938, and Frederick Douglass in 1939. And a 1941 series on John Brown appeared the same year that The Migration of the Negro debuted at the Downtown Gallery in New York. Lawrence continued to balance historical and contemporary subjects throughout his career, but one of the most intriguing projects, which has received less attention from art historians, is the multi-year series entitled Struggle: From the History of the American People. Between 1954 and 1956, at the height of the Cold War and the dawn of the Civil Rights era in America, Lawrence produced 30 12 by 16-inch tempera-on-board paintings representing key moments in U.S. history. The artist had originally intended to paint 60 panels spanning the Revolutionary to World War I periods in an effort to depict, and these are Lawrence's words, the struggles of a people to create a nation and their attempt to build a democracy. His ultimate goal was to publish the series in book form with captions written by his friend Jay Lida, an assistant curator of film at the Museum of Modern Art. It is not fully understood why Lawrence ceased to work on the project halfway through, producing only panels that represented historical moments from 1775 to 1817, Patrick Henry to westward expansion, which I'm showing you here. The finished works were accompanied by rhetorical titles along with attributed quotations. For example, Henry's earnest plea, "Is life so dear or peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery?" Text that underlined America's early fight for independence and national expansion. Lawrence's decision to trace America's historical lineage through a range of different voices, with particular attention to the oft-overlooked contributions of African and Native Americans, as well as women, in addition to the Founding Fathers, was radical, even prescient in the early 1950s, when a more homogeneous colonial revival impulse shaped everything from suburban tract housing to history curricula. And I have to wonder what Lawrence would make of the current Hamilton craze. Viewed in person, and some of you may have actually seen the exhibition of a number of Lawrence's panels at the Phillips Collection or the University of Virginia's Fralin Art Museum in 2015, these quite diminutive works are riveting and powerful in their form and content. Not only are the struggle temperas among the most artistically sophisticated of Lawrence's oeuvre in their striking compositional design and vivid color schemes, but they teem with emotions and feelings, hope and glory, anguish and anger, and you'll notice these bright red accents representing blood that appear in nearly all of the scenes. Taken as a group, the paintings convey the violent conflict and sacrifice that defined our nation's struggle for democracy in a manner that deeply resonates in our contemporary cultural predicament, not to mention ongoing actions around the world. And I should mention that the Peabody Essex Museum, our colleague Austin Bailey, is currently collaborating with former Phillips Collection curator Elizabeth Turner, now at UVA, to organize a fuller showing of the series in the next few years. Unlike Lawrence's other historical visual narratives, which were sold together, or in the case, as you know well, of the Migration series, divided between two institutions, the Phillips Collection and the Museum of Modern Art, the struggle panels were offered individually over a number of years, and today all but 5 of the 25 located works remain in private hands. I'm pleased to say that the work actually this work, number 10 in the series, Washington Crossing the Delaware, was acquired by the Met in 2003, undoubtedly as a foil to the monumental bombastic canvas by Leutze. In Lawrence's quieter scene, the focus is on the collective action of anonymous soldiers rather than a heroic leader. And again, the panel measures 12 by 16 inches compared to Leutze's 12 by 21 feet. If you're familiar with the Leutze and its continuing magnetic pull in the history of art, then you'll know Lawrence was not the only African-American artist to respond to this 19th century cultural icon. And in fact, the NPG owns a great example by the Asian-American Shimomura, which if you haven't seen, take a look at it. It's a wonderful painting. And another post-war West Coast figure painter, Robert Colescott, reimagined the work in a decidedly bawdier blackface version of 1975, on the eve of the bicentennial, that he titled George Washington Carver Crossing the Delaware, page from an American history textbook. In what is probably Colescott's best-known and largest canvas, he placed Carver, a pioneering African-American agricultural chemist, at the helm of a boat loaded with black cooks, maids, fishermen, and minstrels. The artist said that the painting was about the culture of tokenism, his words, which he exploded with transgressive humor and visual style. There's no question that the contemporary New York-based multimedia artist Kara Walker, whose Harper's Print series is currently on view here at SAM, was channeling Colescott more than Leutze or even Lawrence in her 9 by 12 foot work titled The Crossing, which was reproduced in an issue of The New Yorker last February. While it's completely topical as a form of caustic political caricature, it also reminds us of the enduring power and layered meanings of American history painting, the best of which elucidates the gap between our nation's ideals and realities at a particular time and place. And these works, of course, fill the halls of this and many other museums. At the Met, I feel that just as visitors bring their own sets of experiences and expectations to the museum, it's imperative we recognize the multiple, often difficult American histories that go well beyond the 1924 formation of the American Wing and its influential legacy, and continue to critically interrogate our holdings, as well as the way that we display and interpret them. For many museum professionals and audiences, Holland Cotter's 2015 clarion call for such action deeply resonated. And more today seem to feel that there needs to be an ongoing commitment to sharing a broader range of local, national, and international stories through our ever-evolving, expansively defined collections of American art. At the Met, bringing together works by historical Euro-American, Latin American, and Native American artists in different aesthetic and interpretive contexts will allow us to move closer to presenting a so-called American wing that looks and speaks more like America, now more than ever. Thank you. I think I'm allowed to take a few questions if anyone has any. Yes, sir.
Hi. What really struck me was the photo you had of your staff.
You noticed that, huh?
I did. Mostly women, and I think mostly Caucasian, although I didn't
All
zero
women.
in on that.
All women and all culture, a little bit of a mix in there. In some of them,
So I was wondering if you could comment on the 21st century staffing of curation
oh,
and
that's a big question. Wow.
what's going on, like what's happening, and also
Right.
what you as a head of it or in a particular museum are trying to do to diversify curation.
It's a great question, and for those of you who are familiar, the curators in the room certainly are. The American Association of Museum Curators has been really active in taking a lead in looking at issues of pipeline and thinking about how do we bring diversity and inclusion more into the museum practice at an early age. And the Met is very involved in that as well now, and I'm one of the co-chairs of our task force on that, working with Daniel Weiss and other colleagues across the museum. And there's not one easy answer. There's a concerted effort being made right now to really post our jobs more widely. As you can imagine, people come to the Met and they never leave. 3 years, I'm still just there in the blink of an eye. Many of them have a 20 to 30-year career. So that's one of the challenges, certainly. As we begin to turn over the generation, we need to be very open to looking at a broad range of candidates who come from maybe not the traditional backgrounds that we've all been used to. And the museum field, of course, is continuing to change, as we see in the fellows coming through this program and others. We are very committed to just continuing to do that, and I will have an opportunity in the near future in terms of our Native American position to really try to take a lead in that as well. So thank you for your question. Oh, anyone else maybe?
What might be different about a museum's collection if there was a different profile of who's
Exactly.
making those selections? I'm just
We
can
bring
you
different- we
forecast
bring-
what a room would be different if it
Well,
was?
I think it's already happening, excuse me, I think it's already happening, and just bringing different perspectives and different experiences to that practice, no question. And I have to say, I've never worked with a full staff just of women curators before, ever. Every museum I've ever worked at has been kind of a broader group, and this is really kind of, it's exciting, it's unusual. We do have some men in our department, our fabulous, talented art handlers and technicians. But we kind of realized that just about, I guess, 2 years ago, we looked around the table and thought, wow, look at this. This is so it's something that wasn't planned in any way. It's just how it's evolved. But I think you're seeing that across the museum field. And I would commend Sam for having 2 fabulous women museum directors in a row. The Met has yet to do that. You know, there's a lot of buzz about that right now, and we'll see what happens at the top of our institution very soon. Yes.
Could you please come to the microphone and repeat the question? I know everyone has to. And for anyone else who has questions, please make sure you use the mic.
I'm wondering, you talked a lot about the permanent collection at the Met and how you're incorporating new acquisitions and objects into the installation. But I'm wondering if there's a role, and if you've thought of this further, of collaboration between other museums and other collections,
outside
and
the
especially in New York City, where you have such a variety of institutions. And I think that also in Washington, D.C., I think there's opportunities for even more collaboration between the Smithsonian's and National Gallery and other museums, and not only for loans, like you've been talking about, but other programs and initiatives.
Mm-hmm. No, it's a very good question, and we are actually in the process of doing that as well, especially with our colleagues at the New York Historical Society and the Museum of the City of New York. And some of you may know the Studio Museum in Harlem is about to close for a very long renovation project, and we've just had a meeting with them as well to think about how we can do some creative collaborations that might go beyond the traditional kind of, you know, sharing a program or something that we've done in the past. So again, the Met is just very privileged to have such a wealth of collections under one roof that have not been, you could say, as well tapped in the past. I mean, that's certainly part of Tom Campbell's legacy, I would say, that he really encouraged that cross-departmental collaboration that did not happen in the past. I mean, I gather there were years past where heads of departments didn't even talk to each other, wouldn't lend a work to an exhibition. That actually happened. So we're miles past that, but there's still, you know, a ways to go, certainly. And I think certainly here with the Smithsonian, I mean, I can just imagine all the exciting things. I know that you've already done some of that, and probably more is happening soon. So. Maybe one more question. Barbara Gordon, wonderful friend and collector of folk art.
You're being recorded, so and Sylvia, you get our vote for, director of the Met. So.
Oh, right, yeah. No, thank you. I have a good job right now, thank you. Barbara.
I just want to say how wonderful Sylvia is. This is not my question, but I worked with her in Virginia at the Virginia Museum of Fine Art, and they are still crying because she left.
She's a plant, clearly a plant, right?
I just moved
Thank you,
up
Barbara.
here, and I'm going to be moving to New York, so I get to be closer.
Oh, great, I didn't know.
Not really, I just go back and forth.
Okay.
Question, and it's not within your purview, but I know you know a lot about it. What is the future of the Met Breuer?
Well, we have 6 more years in our lease with the Whitney, and we are programmed out through, I think, about 2020 right now in terms of other exciting exhibitions. One just opened last night called Delirium by our colleague in Modern Contemporary, and there'll be some more exhibitions coming up that are more of those cross-departmental collaborations like we had with the Unfinished show that we inaugurated the building with.
Right.
There's one coming up about the body called it's called Lifelike, a collaboration between European sculpture and modern contemporary. So we're hoping more of those types of projects will be developed in that time period, but there's no final word about how we're going to proceed outside of that plan for exhibitions. I should mention, though, just recalled, Randy Griffey, who's one of your fabulous pre-fellows, is working on doing a permanent collection installation of post-war material on one floor of Breuer. I think that will be sometime next year. So we will not just have it as a Kunsthalle of changing exhibitions, but there will be more permanent collection installed there too, I gather, moving forward.
Oh, interesting. So there's no talk beyond the 6 years
Not
of
at
the
this
lease.
point, no. And that's above my pay grade, as you can imagine. So, but
Thank you.
And this will be our last question.
My question, are you familiar with Bill Koch's collection of Western art?
I am, yes.
And the only reason I suggest that, I'm live in Florida, in Palm Beach area, and he had a long exhibition there, but he has a picture of Billy the Kid, which is the only existing photograph of Billy the Kid, and I just was wondering whether a traveling exhibit like we had in Palm Beach might be something that the Met would consider, because it is an extremely unique collection, and he has built himself a museum in Oklahoma.
Generally, we don't do exhibitions of private collections that are not promised to the Met, and that's what a lot of museums do. But we do have a wonderful show right now, looking at Alice Duncan, plug for our friend Thayer Tolles, who's just put together a great show on Remington at the Met. In our Luce Center, we took what had been a computer lab after I arrived and turned it into a changing exhibition space where we can do more of these focus shows, kind of dossier shows that can pull works from across the different departments to create a new context for looking at some of our better-known pictures. So if you're in New York anytime soon, I'd encourage you to stop on the mezzanine and take a look at the Remington show, which actually has some outside loans of some terrific Remington paintings as well. So thank you very much for having me here. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Clarice. And I hope to see you in New York.